Hello, welcome to episode number 7 of a series that can be gracefully shortened as UDT. Today I'll be talking about the first 3 Zerg maps in episode number 2, which is not our episode obviously, but episode of StarCraft. And yeah, map number 1, it's not really much to talk about. It's not super interesting. I think I had, or rather the map probably had the potential to be quite difficult because in principle being a tier 1 Zerg against a Terran with Firebats and Goliaths is really scary. But then the AI doesn't really build any new Goliaths, it doesn't really use them almost at all. And Wraiths are really bad into Hydras, so yeah, nothing really super interesting. Nothing super interesting is going to happen here. There are some units hidden behind trees. The map isn't very big. You have a lot of resources to use. You have an expansion, and the base design for this Terran player is terrible, right? You can just zoom with Zerglings here. He has 2 Firebats, which may help him a bit, but typically it's not really going to be enough to stop you, right? I don't really know what more to say about this, the terrain or the level design itself. It's really straightforward. It's a really small map, but we can probably take a look at the AI, which is maybe slightly more interesting, or at least I think it could be more interesting. Whether it actually is interesting is, well, another topic. You can see that it only builds barracks and starport, but it doesn't have a factory, so it will actually never rebuild the starport. So this might as well be deleted. In remastered, this probably actually causes the script to hang up after you destroy the starport, or at least not work very well, because there are some issues in remastered with handling the way AI prioritizes things when it can't get everything it wants. And yeah, it's only going to use Goliaths for defense. Oh no, it actually it actually attacks with 1 Goliath at some point. But it can't build any new ones, so it will very quickly run out. And other than that, it only attacks with Marines and Wraiths. Because the map is so very small, and those weights are pretty big, I think it's pretty unlikely that anyone will actually ever reach those attacks. I think even if someone is a new player and they are playing this mission for the first time, assuming this is like not their very first StarCraft experience or very first experience with a game in their life, they are probably going to have a very easy time beating this. Yeah. And from this I'll probably move on to mission 1 of the UEDAIP episode 2. So give me a few seconds. And we're back. And in the UEDAIP version, I wanted to go a slightly different route, because you are, like lore-wise, you are meant to be this fledgling, small brute that's just really learning how to even exist. I figured it would make sense for you to be protected by something bigger, and so you are kind of nested in between a huge Garm brood base, and most of what you'll be doing early on is just waiting for drones to build, getting acquainted with the ways how they work, and looking how Garmbrut is handling the Terrans. And because Garmbrut isn't actually really super intelligent, you still start with those 12 Zerglings you start in the normal mission, but in here they actually serve a very important role. This Terran enemy is going to throw a lot of infantry at you, and those Sunkens are not quite going to make the cut if you leave them alone. You have to actually use those Zerglings to reinforce the Sunkens, and while the Sunkens are tanking Marines, which they can do very effectively, you have to pick up the Marines. Or maybe often you have to kill a siege tank that comes with the attack wave. Wraiths early on aren't really a problem, but obviously Garm actually struggling against them, they could be pretty annoying. Thankfully, he gets like Scourge and some free Spore colonies, so I don't think I've ever actually seen him struggle with Wraiths. But in principle, Hydras in UEDAIP vanilla are very expensive, so if you do have a Wraith problem, it will be a very big problem. At least until you can get enough money for Hydras, right? The expansion that was here is moved to the cliff, and this may look kind of bad because now it's just owned by the Terran player, but it's also specifically made this way so that you can harass his workers, and he will obviously try to rebuild them, put some more money into producing them, which will make it very beneficial for you just to send a couple of Hydras behind this mineral line, kill some workers, and retreat back to your base. This is not really like the most optimal way to play this mission. It's meant to give a leg up to players that are struggling and can't really figure out how to get into Brown's base. Or like don't really have enough macro to mount a attack big enough to get into his base. And I think I generally like putting little things like those, because if you have more levers that struggling players can use to cope with the missions, it makes people kind of feel smart for figuring them out. So this is like not this is obvious if you look at how this base is designed, right? This bunker is actually somewhat far back, and Marines suck against Hydras in UEDAIP, so this is not very dangerous. And you have a lot of space here, you won't be blocked by anything, and this ramp is almost completely free. So harassing here should feel natural to you, but still actually consciously noticing this will probably take some effort from someone who is not familiar with the project, and hopefully will prepare them better for future maps. You can also see that I'm not a very nice person, and I actually put firebuds behind those trees this time around, so if you try to go in here with Zerglings, you will probably be quite annoyed. There are some more Goliaths, there are some more bunkers, and you actually have a factory, so this AI is completely self-sufficient. It can rebuild everything it has, and it can also research some upgrades, which wasn't really in the cards previously. I'm going to take a look at the AI script now. I'm not. Wait. Okay, I will. Okay, you can see that, as I said, it's self-sufficient. It builds more stuff. It actually has a higher focus on firebuds, which wasn't the case before. It almost exclusively used Marines for everything. The first attack is still just 2 Marines, but it's like immediately without any waiting, like 16 frames after the map starts, and very quickly it ramps up to 12 Marines, and then it's fire buffs with Goliaths, and then it's 20 Marines, and then it's some Wraiths. It generally has very large attacks, and that's because Garm Brute is. Well, yeah, I previously said it's not the best ally to have, it's not the best player, but because Terrans kind of suck early on, and Sunkens and Hydras are kind of good, even though Garm Brute is not like a very quick responder. What I mean is that it doesn't quite react as quickly as you would like the AI to react, possibly. It still manages to kill a lot of Marines if you just throw a couple of them into the Sunken Grinder. So the attacks have to be sort of big for the player to be even threatened at any point, and for the player to have to use those Zaglings. And the player will have plenty of attention to spare, because they are just macroing up with drones. it takes a relatively long time for them to get a spawning pool and then Hydra den. So they will have a longish time to acquaintance themselves with how Zergling micro works, which is something which is a useful skill to have in a Zerg campaign, right? The script ends with a cloaking field research and some even bigger attacks, but I don't really expect the player to run into this all that often because most people will bleed Brown to death by that point. He doesn't have a whole lot of cash, it's like 530 minerals. And because this expansion is so exposed, even if you can't break through the main base, you will probably be able to figure out a way to bleed him to death, right? Is there anything else to say about this map? I added some doodads. It's not bigger, notably, because I ended up really liking the idea that it's just this tug of war sort of between Zash and the Confederate remnants. And tug of wars tend to work better on smaller maps because you don't have to waste a bunch of time watching groups of units traverse through wastelands. So this is like immediate action and immediate reaction whenever something happens. Yeah, and I think I'm going to go to map number 2 now. Oh, I just realized I was scrolling with the AI script window still open, but you guys didn't really miss anything. I was just throwing out those amazing grass doodads. Okay, let's go to map 2. The first thing that greets us in the map 2 is those Terran crystals. If you haven't seen one of those previously, I think I explained it at some point, but they are hunter killers. I just reused the Kaidan crystals sprite entry, so they end up looking the same as Kaidan crystals in the map editor. But in game they will be hunter killers. This map is more interesting. It's kind of funny that I mentioned a tug of war just a moment ago because the layout of this map is very reminiscent of that design. You have 3 lanes and each of them is slightly different in terms of what you will face. Obviously it's not actually a tug of war because there's no tagging going on. But I thought it's a interesting aspect of the map. And what I also think is that it ends up being very imbalanced because I think the idea was that you could choose how you want to progress to the beacon, but this left pathway is just so much easier than the remaining ones. I don't think you ever would want to go through the middle or through the top side. Like, this is terrible. We have a lot of units and a narrow choke. Here you have zealots on ramps, which can be pretty annoying. You will probably get blocked here and maybe even aggro those dragoons. If you go here, you have another zealot. You will probably aggro this. You can kind of hack the bottom maybe. And you will have to run into this from the front, and you will always run into this no matter what. But if you go here, you only have 2 dragons, and they can be engaged with one by one without anything else intervening. You have a dragoon and a scout. You can probably ignore both of those cannons if you just go bot immediately. You will maybe tank a cannon shot or 2, and then you can go straight for this, which is unavoidable, and just go to the end. Does this even matter? Probably not. But I think the left pathway kind of trivializes this map because I'm pretty sure you can just go with the starting hunter killers and win immediately. Obviously, there are way worse things about this map. When the game was released, for a very long time, you could do a weird trick with a beacon that involved making this, teleporting this drone as a hatchery somewhere around here, and then canceling the hatchery, and then just winning the map in 2 seconds, or something along those lines. But those are not really things that normal players will encounter, whereas figuring out that the bottom pathway is kind of easier than the other ones is a real thing that a player may notice. You never have to interact with this process base. Why would you? There's no incentive. And notably, since all of those units are just guards, it's quite possible that they will be taken for an attack at some point, and when they are, you won't really have anything guarding this beacon because there's just no other player that would be here. What can I say about the economy? You have a interesting mineral layout because in terms of a burst of mining, it's very good. You can mine a lot very quickly, but the values of the yield values on those minerals are very low, so you won't be able to mine for long, which maybe encourages you to just say fuck it, go through one of those lanes and end the map in like 10 minutes or so if you're starting the game. So it's an interesting design in that aspect. There's also no expansion at all, which is another thing that's probably meant to encourage you to not sit there too long. In that aspect, I think it's actually very interesting because the StarCraft maps kind of struggle with showing you when you should focus on the objectives instead of doing random stuff around the map. And here I think this economy layout is very indicative of the designer actually trying to encourage the player to go for the objective. We are going to take a look at the script now. If you excuse me for 1 or 2 seconds while I try to locate it. Okay, I got it. It builds gateways, cybernetics core, and a Stargate. It uses zealots, dragoons, and scouts to defend with. It has a max force of 500, which was seen in the previous map. And it's slightly more scary than the Terran script. It attacks noticeably more often, and it also attacks with Protest units, which are naturally better at lower numbers. Towards the end, it starts attacking every 6,000 frames, which is like, let's say, 6 minutes or something along those lines. But still, if you are a new player and you wait that long, you are probably going to be scared or like slightly stressed out by an attack of, let's say, 3 zealots, 3 dragons, 3 scouts. But like I said, the map design really encourages you to not let this go on for so long. So we will probably never ever meet this, but if you do, it's kind of scary, right? Okay, let's move on to the UEDAIP version. Something you are just going to keep seeing in the UEDAIP version of episode 2 is that whenever I can feasibly add an AI ally, I'm going to do it. It's a huge theme in both this and the next episode, I think, because I'd like for this to have that feeling of, a cohesive military trying to do something, even if the military organization in this case is the Swarm, which is not quite an organization, but well, is it an organization? I think you could treat the Overmind as a usually in games when you have this concept of the swarm, like in Halo, for example, you have the flood, I think, right? And it's very often presented as this hive mind thingy where everything thinks the same. And the Zerg are supposed to be kind of like this, but at the same time they have a very high degree of individualization in terms of how the swarm functions, because you have cerebrates that are doing kind of their own thing, and you have the overmind that is kind of he's the overmind leader. He just says funny stuff, but it's implied that the overmind is leading everything from behind the scenes, right? I think it's this way so that the player has an easier time understanding the narrative, because humans are not quite a hive mind, so it's very hard to present how a hive mind would think to a human. But nonetheless, it ends up feeling like there's a bit of a disconnect for me between the idea of the swarm, like that whole unity and so on, and how actually it's presented in the game. But a result of that is me trying to incorporate other parts of the swarm in the Zerg missions, so you can see how it's all trying to mesh together to actually get you to Ire and to actually destroy the Protoss, right? So here you have Dagoth. Dagoth trains hunter killers for you. Instead of getting six hunter killers immediately, you will have to wait for them a bit. You can get more than 6 potentially, I think, but in any case, it's going to something that just happens throughout the mission instead of being a huge burst of starting units. And he also trains Impalers, which, if you have played Heart of the Swarm, Impalers are going to be familiar to you. It's basically, it's not really the same unit stat-wise, but it's the same concept as Heart of the Swarm Impalers, which is a long-range single-target lurker. It would be kind of bad to let a sprite go to waste, since lurkers aren't available in vanilla, so I just used Impalers instead. And I really liked them as a concept of what the lurker could have evolved from, because when using Impalers, it's kind of obvious that they do not fill the same role at all, and you really, really would like to have lurkers against Marines and whatever swans of stuff that you meet in episode 2, and you don't. So you kind of feel like you would love to have lurkers. And obviously that what happens in Furor, because the Zerg improve, and they see that, hey, Impalers kind of suck in some cases, that we would want to use them, so maybe we should evolve them towards lurkers. At least that was my thought process behind making something like this. And this is obviously not to say that Impalers just suck wholesale, because they have their uses. They can be good, especially with how the AI uses them. They can be really scary if you don't have an observer, because they will almost never unburrow, unlike lurkers. But still, the point stands. I moved away from the idea that everything had to be I didn't move away from that at all. I meant to say that I moved away from the idea that everything has to be fortified, but I really just cleaned up the top right part of the map, and that's because I added an expansion, because I expect you to spend slightly more time here than you normally would in the original version. But this pathway is still kind of blocked, and the middle is still very much blocked, and in fact it's way more difficult to get through, because you actually have a production structure right here now. You have some less units, I think, but the AI is going to reinforce, so that doesn't matter. You have way more buildings along the way to the beacon, and you have cannons near the beacon. So those are not going to go anywhere. They won't be used in attacks, so you always have to destroy them before you actually can access the beacon and deposit the chrysalis. The Protoss base is bulkier. It has a wider ramp towards it, I think, or maybe it doesn't. I'm not really sure. But there is an actual incentive to go for the Protoss now, and it's that if you destroy the Protoss here, they are going to be weaker in a future mission, which is mission 6. I like to kind of include those types of things whenever I'm not sure how to make something come out naturally from the map design part of how something works. Because obviously, map design wise, you still don't care about the space. It's best to ignore it. It's best to just go straight for the beacon. Going straight for the beacon is slightly more different, but by adding the incentive that you can kill the Protoss to have some benefit, you give meaning to this base that would normally just almost not exist, right? If you know how in Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos, you have this mission where the Purging of Stratholme, I think it's called, right? Where Malgan is going after civilians and you have to stop him, and most of the space you're operating on is this huge city, but Malgan has a base somewhere in the corner of the map that doesn't really matter. So this base is normally exactly that. You don't want it to matter, it doesn't matter. You are just operating through the middle of the map and through the alleys towards the beacon, but adding a bank event to this particular space is a possibly interesting way to have some extra reward for players who feel that they are strong enough to take on this base. The Protoss AI will actually expand to take this base if you let them. You have more resources because again I expect you to take slightly more time here. And the Protoss will also keep using some of those cliffs to make drops at your mineral line, which is obviously meant to be kind of annoying. And that's it for the map part, and I will now open the script itself. Okay. If you see something like this, it's just used for the secondary AI. So obviously in this case, it's used for Dagoff. And as I said, that he's going to use hunter killers, he's going to use hydralisks, he's going to use impalers, which are labeled as lurkers internally because it's the same unit ID. And the biggest attacks Dagoff does are like 6 hydras or hydras and some lurkers, some impalers, so not very big at all. The Protoss itself uses way more units. In the original, it just used zealots, dragoons, and scouts. Here, it also uses archons and reavers. I'm pretty sure at some point. Yeah, it does use reavers. It starts attacking you with relatively large forces pretty quickly, with like 1 dragoon, 1 archon, and 3 dragoons, 4 scouts, 1 river, and some zealots and some archons. It's meant to be somewhat scary. This attack is actually huge, and that's because this is another way of incentivizing player to not spend too long in the mission, especially when there's a bonus objective involved in how you can destroy the Protoss base to get some reward. You have to try to weed out players that would want to turtle and still get the bonus objective, because they don't necessarily have the capacity to get it. And the best way to do that is to actually have some pressure put on by the AI and incentivize the player to remember that the main objective is probably still more important. This may feel annoying to people in this particular mission because they will miss a objective, but in some maps like the Duke map in the Terran campaign, it's really important to remember what the main objective is, because you will get endlessly frustrated by trying to do something that the map doesn't really ask you to do. So if you try to full clear the Duke map, you will just think the map is impossible. And similarly, if you are a slow player and you will try to do the bonus objective forever, it's probably better to just cut your losses in a way, like don't get too frustrated about it and just miss out on the bonus objective. It makes a future map easier, but it's also not really the hardest map in the project, so you can kind of live without it. It's kind of weird to talk about this. I don't mean this in a way where I want to punish players for getting bonus objectives, but you kind of have to try and punish them in a way to remind them again what the main point of the map is. And you could say in response, I'm sure, that while the player decides what the point of the map is, right? Like they can decide on how they want to have fun with the map. And my answer is they still can do that, they just have to play well enough. And it's also up to the player to decide if they feel it's worth their time to improve and figure out a way to experience this map in a different light, or if they are not really interested in improving and they feel that doing the map a second time or something like that would be a waste of time. I hope I didn't make this overly complicated. Honestly, I have trouble following all those lines of thought myself a little bit, but I like to think that they end up being at least a little bit understandable at the end of the day. In any case, if you have questions about this or what I'm saying sounds like nonsense, you can always ask in the comments and I will respond probably, and hopefully when I actually put things into writing they will be a little bit easier to understand. And with this we will be moving on to map number 3, which is... Can I even remember the name of map number 3? Oh god, I don't even remember what you do in map number 3. Wait, what is Zerg 3? Oh, it's the New Dominion. Okay, that's actually a fun one. See you guys in a second. The New Dominion truly shows you the ingenuity of the Zerg swarm, as they use 3 spore colonies to protect the most important being they have ever created against Enemy Duke, who specializes in siege tanks and mech in general. This is really weird. I don't know why they do that. I think in the next map, the things that are around to protect the chrysalis are way better. You also have a kind of weird setup where you have a lot of units to start with, but there aren't really any outposts to go after early on. You can just kill some free units, but it's also a lot of units, so you may lose a muta or two if you're a new player. I don't like it that much. You don't have that many expansion opportunities. You have this one, which is really low yield, and then you have this one, which if you get this, you are already winning the game, so why bother? I think this map is a difficulty spike in terms of what a new player expects when playing StarCraft for the first time. The enemy has a lot of units, and I will look into the attacks in a few moments. They probably won't be anything scary, but I feel like when I used to look at new players playing StarCraft for the first time, when I was doing like UEDAIP related research, this map was probably one that people had some issues with. And you can see even like by how the base is designed that it's you go from zealots guarding ramps, which aren't super scary. They are annoying but not super scary, and from bases being almost completely open to two siege tanks and bunkers being right at the entrance of a base. It's a huge jump, and even though you get some more units here, you get mutas. I think you may even get queens. I actually have to check if I'm lying or not. Do you get queens? Terran, Zerg, air units, Zerg queen. No, Zerg queen is disabled. Okay, so we just get mitas. So you get mitas and maybe tier 2 upgrades. And you have to deal with a base that's just littered with missile turrets. It's not impossible, obviously, because the AI is going to be very slow. It's just kind of annoying, and it it moves the balance between how fun it is to play a map that's just destroy everything a bit too close to a a slog-like experience, because it's not really like you are fighting for something. You just have to mass a huge enough force to even be able to interact with the base in any way. And since the AI doesn't have expansions, there are like no medium-sized objectives anywhere on the map to take. There are just more fortifications like on this side. And you could say, hey, this actually is brilliant. You have this less protected ramp that you can enter through, and then this base is easy pickings. But then you still have that siege tank here, and those two siege tanks here will still be able to hit at this bunker. So it doesn't really work out. And when you go through this right side, you will also have you will also trigger defenders around this stargate, starport, sorry. So the AI will react more quickly, whereas when going through this, siege tanks, missile turrets, and bunkers don't actually count as something the AI will defend, so you will only actually trigger defenders around this command center. And triggering defenders will make the AI pull units from over here and like anything that can move basically. Is there anything more to say about the economy or the base? I don't think so. I think one thing this map fails is this should have probably been a map that incentivizes you to use metalisks, because you get a bunch of them to start with, and you get 2 gas really quickly. But instead you have a lot of missile turrets, and you have only one base to really hit, and this base is like this mineral line is surrounded by marines, bunkers, and missile turrets. So you just don't really have a good angle to get into. A good angle to get into the space. I think I'd like to see something like a base here that you can kind of learn how to use mutas against it and how to kill enemy workers and stuff. Obviously, Blizzard didn't really care that much about actually teaching the game back in 96 or 97. But you do see those glimpses of them trying to drive some idea in, and this mission definitely falls short of any kinds of those aspirations. Let's move on to the AI script. Oh, wrong window. Oh no. Wait, can I even get it? Oh, okay, I got it. Okay. What do we have here? You got only 4 SCVs, which is probably the biggest shortcoming of this AI. 4 SCVs are a painfully slow resource income, are going to be painfully slow at generating income, is what I mean. So even though the map design is kind of asinine, you will eventually be able to overpower the AI just based on the fact that it doesn't almost mine anything. It almost doesn't mine anything. It actually is self-sufficient this time around. It builds barracks, factory, and starport. It uses a lot of siege tanks to defend with. And by a lot, I mean that it doesn't have a defined limit. So it will basically build as many siege tanks and firebats as possible, which makes it quite annoying to go against it. But notably, it doesn't get Goliaths to defend against air. So I think this kind of reinforces the idea that this was meant as this could have been meant as a sort of showcase for metalists, except there's all the other problems that I mentioned. Yeah, you may notice at this point that those scripts often don't really research anything, and if they have anything researched at all, it's going to be from like frame instantly researched in the map from frame 0. And otherwise in the script there's like legitimately nothing, not even a single upgrade mentioned. This one is going to attack with 2 marines, then 4 firebats, 2 marines, then some firebats and marines and vultures, then firebats, marines and wraiths, then some mech and marines. And it's going to attack every like 4 or 6 minutes about. The attacks are decently sized, but still, looking at them, I'm sticking to my opinion that the biggest problem people would have here is being able to get into the base. And if you are actually a very new player, you are struggling, you don't know how to control units, it's probably going to be the most frustrating map out of those 3, because it's just so easy to lose units for nothing going into siege tanks and missile turrets. And if you can't destroy something that a Terran player has, he will be able to repair it at a premium cost, right? Like paying less than they would need to pay to rebuild it. So we can. I hope that you can imagine where my thoughts about the frustration come from. Let's move on to the UEDAIP version of this map. In UEDAIP's New Dominion, you can immediately see that my map design is way more asinine than Blizzard's in terms of how hard is it to get into this base. And we'll talk about the reasons for that in a second, but there's more siege tanks in slightly better places. You have low ground bunkers reinforced by siege tanks, and there's nothing on the ramp here, which actually can make it a sort of easier pathway to get into the main base, but we'll also talk about a small obstacle in a moment. But if you can actually get through here before that obstacle materializes, there's the buildings that were here are slightly more pulled back, so you have plenty of space to get into this, and maybe you can use some zerglings to actually wreak some havoc on this mineral line, especially if you notice that it's actually slightly further away from the siege tanks this time around. A second thing you could notice is that this map is actually slightly longer. If you look at, I don't actually remember if the bottom was added or the top was added, but either way, it was extended in one of the directions. and as a result the base is slightly less squished. You start here. Those flags that you see are actually kukulzas. Kukulzas have one very interesting property, which is that they have more bounces, and their bounces do not lose damage over time, which means that they are perfect for murdering large groups of marines. And they are going to be very useful here because your opponent is going to use a lot of marines. You can also immediately notice that you have an AI ally yet again. This time it's used to try to develop an interesting quirk that I wanted to toy with a little bit, and it's that you can actually send units to this beacon, and if you send them, the AI is going to kill units only around this beacon, and for each unit it kills, it's going to get way more than it's worth in terms of resources. So if it kills an overload, it's going to get like 200 minerals. If it kills a hydraulisk, it's going to get like 150 minerals and like 100 gas, something like this. Basically, you can transfer money, the AI, but you actually have to spend the time on making a unit that you transfer. And if you don't do that, this AI does get angry at some point, and when it gets angry, it will try to attack you, and it will only stop until it kills enough of your units that it won't get mad. It won't be mad anymore. There's like a counter built for that. You can sort of guesstimate when it will happen, but basically it happens when white hasn't received anything for a while and has had a low resources for a while. And there is also like an audio cue before that materializes, so you can still react if you catch on with what's happening. I kept the useless spore colonies, except this time the AI uses more raves. And also this is UEDAIP, so you can transfer between colonies anytime you wish. This base is very protected. It's obviously meant to not really be hit at all throughout the game, except maybe if some waves slip by. Similarly, this sacrificial area is not threatened at all. This white Balrog Brood base will probably not really be threatened unless you are really majorly losing anyway. So most often your lose condition is going to be this exposed chrysalis, and as for why it would be here narratively, I don't know. It for the same reason that the Zerg decided to only put 3 spores around the chrysalis in the original, I guess. But map design wise, you had to have something to protect, right? And this map just works out the best if this something happens to be the chrysalis, and if the chrysalis is in a forward position, because when it's in the back, it doesn't matter, right? It has to be close enough to the front to be threatened, or it's not really a objective that you would ever think about. This expansion is slightly more rich, and it's also available to you from the get-go. I've also added an expansion here that can be claimed by the Terran player, and this expansion is meant as a place where you can show off your Mutalisk prowess and hunt for SCVs for as long as it exists, and when you destroy it, the AI will try to get an expansion here, and you can, albeit with some more trouble, but you can still fly over here and use mitas, and there probably won't be too much to annoy you on the side of minerals, so it will be relatively safe for meta flybys, and the AI won't rebuild those missile turrets once they're gone. So you have some, I'd hope to think that you have lots more space to actually use metas, and some more creativity can be found in your playthrough of this map. This is another kind of. This is another case where there will be a slight tug of war going on, with white and red fighting over control of this alley. Typically, it kind of naturally works out in a way where, as you destroy red's expansion and as you can keep harassing him with Mutalisks, it will help white enough so that he will be able to break into this. He also has guardians, which will be obviously hugely useful in terms of breaking those defenses. And this is why the defenses are even harder than they were in the original map, because you actually have an ally with an access to guardians, with an access to ultralists. So even though this is still really scary, it's only meant to be kind of scary for you. It's meant to incentivize you to find a way to be smart with how you approach the space, instead of just smashing 1 SH, 2 SH, 3 SH, and so on, which is typically a huge problem in Zerg campaigns. It's really hard to make the player not just spam Hydras, and even if you try to think of ways to do it, just spamming Hydras is probably the best way to win them up. Obviously, this is not necessarily bad, because players can play however they like to. So who am I to tell a player that they should not build Hydras? It's not really about that directly. Instead, it's about making sure that doing something else than mass Hydra is still viable. And if someone happens to not like Hydras, or if someone happens to want to do something else, they still feel supported by the map, and they still feel like there's some other way to play the game that is not super painful. Is there anything else to say about the map? Red can get battle cruisers, but it requires him to have a lot of cash and have this right side expansion for quite a bit of time. So typically you won't be able to see it. And White also gets some money for killing Terrans. It's way less than what he gets for your sacrificed units, but it's meant as a way to help him a bit when he's actually doing well by himself. He won't really be able to win them up on his own ever, maybe unless you play on easy, I guess. But like I said, with some Muta help, he will be able to make some effective pushes, and especially if you give him resources, he will hold his weight. Also, interestingly, he will make some new Kukalzas for you if you keep giving him money. Just like a small resource threshold that you have to reach before he starts making them, but it's not super high. Oh, and this area was purposefully. Sorry, I'm recording this straight after 1:2, so I'm already increasingly unable to speak. This low ground area is purposefully, Jesus Christ, on purpose. It's low ground on purpose, which is what I want to convey, because I wanted to make it slightly easier to defend. But wait, I'm trying to explain from a really weird angle. Obviously, this right side pathway is the main way in which you are going to be experiencing Red's attack directly, because on the left side you are just protected by your ally. So it came up during my early testing that it was actually attacks that are meant to be scary in this map are really, really scary if you are fighting them on even ground. So the best way to still have kinds of attacks that can be scary both for you and for the AI ally. And be able to fight through those attacks was to make them fight a literal uphill battle. So they have to go down here, and up here you can place some Sankans, and Sankans will be able to deal with a lot of whatever comes at them. And you can also use the starting Kukul just to thin out Marine waves and snipe some tanks. So yeah, it works out well that there's a long ground here. I really didn't need to explain it in such a convoluted way, but you know, there's just something about talking for an hour that makes you talk like that, although I'm sure people will point out that I'm doing it even earlier. Anyway, let's just take a look at the AI script before I'll log off. Again, you see an if owned hive clause at the start of the script, which goes right into the Balrog Brood script. The Balrog Brood uses tier 3 units, it uses a lot of stuff. It immediately attacks with like ultras. If it were facing off against a player, it would be a script at like in one of the last missions of the campaign. It's relatively scary, and it attacks relatively often, although the attacks themselves aren't super big. I mean, in UEDAIP, 14 Hydras and 2 Guardians are somewhat scary, but it's not like a huge attack. It's medium-sized. You can see something like this at the end of the script. I don't do this super often. Oh wait, what am I even doing here? Okay, this is what I was talking about earlier, where if it kills a Zergling of yours, it adds like 66 minerals. If it kills a Hydralisk, it adds 150 minerals and 75 gas, and so on. So basically, if White kills something of yours, he gets more money than whatever it was worth. And going to the Terran player, he does get Goliaths and Firebats this time around, and he does get some Goliaths against air, although I still stuck with the idea that it shouldn't be too many, so he just uses however many he has, and he doesn't explicitly train them against air units. He only uses Goliaths against ground units, and then if he has some leftover, he can still use them against air. His attacks are really, really large. Maybe the first ones not so much, but very quickly you get to like 4 siege tanks and firebats, 25 marines, 5 firebats, 25 marines, 6 siege tanks. They are meant to be really scary, and they are meant to be really satisfying to destroy with Kukulzas and Mutas overall. Marines are good-ish against Mutas, but with that cheat code almost of Kukulzas, they just fall over immediately. There's the expansion code, and this is the battlecruiser town. After a relatively long time, it actually starts attacking with some battlecruisers. Is there anything else to talk about? I don't think so, but if you had any thoughts about this mission, or if you wanted to ask about something tangentially related to what I'm talking about, feel free to ask away in the comments. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you next time. Bye!